Hey guys, today our story is why blue paint was once worth more than gold. Let's figure it out together. In the stillness of a medieval monastery, where thick stone walls rise against the night wind, and the air carries the faint scent of wax and ink, the corridors are hushed, broken only by the faint echo of sandals across flagstones. Within, hidden away from the world outside, lies the scriptorium. The scriptorium is not large, but it feels vast in silence. A dozen wooden desks stand in rows, each marked by melted candle stubs, ink pots, and quills. The air is thick with the memory of words copied over centuries, prayers, histories, poems, and letters meant to outlive the men who wrote them. Tonight, only one monk remains at his desk. The others have retired to the dormitory, but he lingers in the warm circle of his candle's glow. His face is shadowed by the hood of his robe, and his hands move slowly with reverence. Before him lies a parchment, stretched tight and pale as cream. At its side, a small clay bowl waits, filled not with soot-black ink, but with something far rarer, a pigment ground from stone. The stone is called lapis lazuli, a fragment of mountain, carried across deserts, traded through bazaars, shipped overseas, and finally delivered into the hands of craftsmen who crushed it into dust. The powder gleams like ground sapphire, a blue so deep it feels alive. Mixed with oil and gum, it becomes paint more precious in his world than gold. The monk dips his brush into the mixture. The tip glides across the parchment, laying down a stroke of blue that glimmers even in dim candlelight. He pauses for a moment, gazing at it as though the color itself contains a mystery. Blue in his time is not common. The fields are green, the skies gray or clouded, the earth brown. Dyes for clothing run toward ochres, blacks, dull reds. But this blue, this lapis, belongs to heaven, to visions, to things beyond reach. It is said that the pigment came from mines in the distant lands of Badakhshan, in what is now Afghanistan. For thousands of years, only those mountains yielded this stone. Merchants carried it on caravans over barren plains, risking raids, hunger, and thirst. When it reached Venice or Genoa, it was worth its weight in treasure. Kings and queens demanded it, artists coveted it, churches reserved it for their holiest images. The monk knows this, though he will never see those mountains. He knows because the abbot has told him with quiet pride that their monastery has been granted a small supply, enough to illuminate the robes of saints, to color the skies of painted miniatures, to weave heaven into parchment. He writes a letter, then another, each capped with a swirl of blue. The strokes shimmer faintly in the candle's glow. He leans closer, his breath fogging lightly against the parchment, and admires the way the pigment seems to sink into the page, leaving behind a color that will never fade. Gold leaf can tarnish, silver darkens, but this blue will remain as vivid in centuries as it does tonight. Outside, the wind brushes against the stone walls. The monastery garden stirs softly, its lavender stalks bending. A single bell in the tower tolls the late hour. Yet inside the scriptorium, time feels suspended. Each stroke of the monk's brush is both an act of devotion and defiance, a promise that what he writes will live beyond him. He pauses to stir the pigment, watching how it clings to the brush. It took days to prepare, washing the crushed lapis again and again, separating the finest particles from the coarse. The labor was so great that only the wealthiest patrons could afford the finished paint. When commissioned, some artists charged separately for the use of blue, accounting for each stroke as carefully as if they were handling jewels. For the monk, there is no payment, no patron, only the quiet knowledge that the page before him will be added to a manuscript carried into the library, bound in leather and kept safe. Perhaps one day a noble will read it. Perhaps centuries later, when these walls have crumbled, a traveler will open its cover and see the same strokes of blue that glow tonight. He thinks of Mary, the Virgin, whose robes are nearly always painted with this same pigment. The church decreed it so that the rarest, most precious pigment should be reserved for her. The blue became a symbol of purity, devotion, and the divine. He thinks, too, of how strange it is that a stone from distant mountains could come to symbolize heaven itself. Men mine it with rough hands, crush it beneath hammers, wash it in bowls, knead it with oils. And yet when it reaches the parchment, it no longer seems earthly. It seems eternal. The monk dips the brush again, steadying his hand. His candle flickers, and for an instant, the blue catches firelight. It seems to glow from within like a jewel set in the page. He continues, his strokes careful, precise. His hand has written thousands of words, but tonight, he feels each one differently. Each word is framed in eternity by this pigment. Hours pass. The fire in the hearth dwindles, embers pulsing faintly. The candle burns low, wax pooling at its base. Still he writes. His back aches, but he pays no mind. The silence of the room has wrapped itself around him, broken only by the faint scratch of brush against parchment. At last, he lays the brush down. The page is complete. He lifts it gently, holding it closer to the candlelight. The blue glimmers, soft as silk, strong as stone. He smiles faintly, not for himself, but for the work. For the knowledge that what he has made tonight will outlast him. In the library, bound between thick wooden covers, it will wait. Decades, centuries, perhaps longer. And long after the names of the monks are forgotten, long after the candle smoke has faded from these walls, the blue will remain. Because once, in the medieval world, blue was more than a color. It was a treasure. It was a fragment of the earth that became a vision of heaven. It was, quite literally, worth more than gold. And tonight, in the hush of the scriptorium, you have seen it come to life. Far away from the monastery, beyond rolling hills and forests, beyond seas and kingdoms, there were mountains. Jagged, cold, and immense, they rose from the earth like ancient guardians. In their veins lay the secret of the color blue hidden in the stone called lapis lazuli. For thousands of years, people had climbed those cliffs, chiseling the stone from rock faces, carrying it down narrow paths on the backs of mules. The mines of Badakhshan were perilous places. Snow clung to ridges, the air was thin. Yet still men returned, year after year, because what they carried out was unlike anything else in the world. The stone was wrapped in cloth, packed in crates, and loaded onto caravans. Across deserts it traveled, through lands of dust and wind, where merchants guarded their wares with swords and spears. The road was long, weeks upon weeks of walking, each step echoing with the weight of treasure. At night, the traders lit small fires and sat in circles, their goods piled close by. They spoke of storms, of raiders, of the endless horizon. And among their packs lay fragments of the earth that would one day glow on the page of a monk's manuscript or in the robes of a painted saint. From the mountains to the Middle East, from the Middle East to the ports of the Mediterranean, each hand that touched the stone added to its value. By the time it reached Europe, lapis was a marvel, a rarity whispered about in royal courts and cathedral halls. In Venice, merchants displayed it alongside silks and spices. Nobles came to look, to marvel at its deep hue. Artists begged for even a small supply, but often the pigment was reserved not for them, but for churches, who wished to paint the skies of heaven in the richest blue that money could buy. Gold was wealth, yes. Silver was wealth. But blue was something else entirely. It was not simply money, it was meaning. To paint with lapis was to reach toward the divine. To color a robe with it was to honor the sacred. To place it in a manuscript was to ensure the book's worth, both in earthly treasure and in spiritual devotion. And so, little by little, the pigment found its way into monasteries, into workshops, into the hands of men like the monk in our story. Imagine now the library of the monastery. Rows of books bound in leather, their spines unmarked but filled with years of labor. Each page copied letter by letter, each illustration painted stroke by stroke. In the dim light, the books seem almost to breathe, as though the words inside are alive, waiting to be read again. Among them are volumes where the color blue shimmers still, gold has dulled. Ink has faded, but the lapis untouched by time remains as bright as the night it was painted. Centuries pass, kings rise and fall, wars sweep across the land. Yet in these pages, the color is unchanged, glowing like a secret flame. There is a story whispered among historians of a single book, a manuscript so rich in blue that its patron nearly bankrupted himself to pay for it. Every robe, every border, every sky painted in lapis, shimmering against gold leaf. The book itself became a treasure not for its words, but for its color. And in small villages, when such books were displayed, people gathered in wonder. They had never seen such blue, not in cloth, not in glass, not in nature. It was otherworldly. It was heaven, brought down to earth. Back in the scriptorium, the monk stirs his pigment again. He does not think of caravans or merchants or faraway mountains. To him, the bowl of blue before him is enough. It is not stone or treasure, but a gift for the page. His brush moves, careful and deliberate. He outlines a capital letter, then fills it with color. Around the edges, he adds gold leaf, pressed gently with a small knife. The gold shines, yes, but it is the blue that holds his gaze. It is a blue that reminds him of morning skies after rain. A blue that feels like the robes of angels painted above the altar. A blue that cannot be explained, only felt. When he writes, he forgets the hour. He forgets the ache in his fingers, the weight in his shoulders. All that matters is the line, the curve, the stroke. All that matters is that when this page is bound, it will carry the mark of his hand and the eternity of the pigment. The candlelight shifts, and for an instant, the blue seems almost to glow from within. The monk wonders if this is what heaven looks like, not gold, not fire, not marble halls, but the infinite calm of this color. There are other monks in other monasteries who work with simpler inks, black made from soot, red made from ochre, green from copper, all useful, all beautiful. But none as rare, none as sacred as this. In towns, people wear clothing dyed with plant colors, browns, yellows, faded greens. Only the wealthy can afford cloth dyed in strong hues. But even kings cannot wear a blue as deep as this one, for it does not belong to fabric. It belongs to parchment, to paint, to holy work. And so, blue became a color not of clothing, but of worship. A color people saw only in churches and books and paintings. A color tied to reverence, to awe, to the divine. The monk finishes another page. He places it carefully on the desk to dry, and for a moment he closes his eyes. He thinks of the journey the pigment has taken to reach him. Mountains, deserts, seas, and now a small stone chamber lit by a single candle. It is a strange thought that so many hands, so many lives have carried this blue across the world, and yet he is the one who holds it now. He who will never leave these walls has within reach a fragment of distant earth, a piece of heaven. The hours deepen, the scriptorium grows colder. Outside, the stars wheel silently across the sky. Somewhere, an owl cries. Somewhere, water drips steadily from the roof into a stone basin. The monastery sleeps, but here, in this single room, the light burns on. The monk turns another page. The blue gleams again. And time, once more, is forgotten. For long after the monk lays down his brush, long after the candle gutters and dies, the blue will remain. It will wait in silence across centuries, waiting to be opened again, waiting to shine again, waiting to remind whoever sees it that once, long ago, blue was more than a color. It was a treasure. It was a prayer. It was worth more than gold. The road wound on, and with each step, Brother Alaric noticed the play of light across the world around him. The spring air was sharp yet sweet, carrying the faint scent of tilled earth and budding flowers. Farmers moved like dark silhouettes against wide fields, their plows biting into the soil. Though their hands were calloused and their backs bent with labor, there was a steady dignity in their movements. Alaric thought of how each harvest, each loaf of bread, and each cask of ale found its way back to the Abbey's tables, just as surely as the Abbey's books would one day find their way into the hands of lords, scholars, and wanderers alike. By midday, he reached a small market town, clustered tightly around the square. Timber-framed houses leaned slightly toward one another as though in hushed conversation. Smoke drifted from their crooked chimneys, carrying with it the smell of roasting meat and peat fires. Alaric adjusted his satchel and stepped through the bustle. Children darted between carts, chasing a hoop. A fiddler stood at the corner, bowing out a lively tune that somehow sat in harmony with the clatter of hooves and the calls of merchants. It was there, in the hum of trade, that Alaric paused before a small booth set apart from the others. The awning was patched with fabric of many hues, and its table was lined with little jars, each one stoppered, each one containing powder of the most vivid colors he had ever seen. Ochres and reds, verdant greens, and a faint glimmer of silver dust that seemed to catch the sunlight like dew. Yet among them, one stood apart, a jar sealed with wax, inside of which sat a fine powder of the deepest blue, as though ground from the very sky. The merchant behind the booth leaned forward. His beard was streaked with gray, and his eyes carried the shrewd gleam of one who had traveled far. "Lapis," he whispered, though the market was already loud enough to drown most voices. "Straight from the mountains of the east, worth more than coin, worth more than gold." Alaric's breath caught. He had heard of lapis lazuli only in the whispered accounts of older monks' tales of merchants who brought stones across deserts, overseas, through the treacherous hands of pirates and bandits. Ground fine and mixed with oil or egg, it became ultramarine, a pigment so rare and precious that even kings hesitated before commissioning its use. To hold such a thing in his gaze, here, in this noisy market, felt unreal. "Where do these mountains lie?" Alaric asked softly. The merchant's smile curled knowingly. "Far beyond the reach of most. Afghanistan, some call it now, though names change with each passing empire. There the rock is pulled from dark veins, cut, carried on camelback, and traded across the world. You might cross 3 lifetimes and not set foot in those mines. Yet here it is, ground for you, ready to make saints' robes glow like the morning sky." Alaric felt the weight of the satchel on his shoulder. Though filled with vellum, it suddenly seemed insignificant beside the little jar of blue. "I cannot pay what it's worth," he murmured. The merchant only chuckled. "You can. But there are other ways than coin. Words travel, and abbeys keep records. A man who deals in colors values reputation more than gold. Remember me, monk, when your abbot commissions a work. Remember this jar." He tapped the glass gently, and the dust shimmered like stars caught in daylight. Alaric nodded, imprinting the scene upon his mind. He lingered only a little longer before moving on, yet the vision of the blue jar followed him long after he left the market's noise behind. The road south bent toward a river, and at its banks stood a ferry run by a broad-shouldered man with a voice like gravel. Alaric gave him a token from the abbey, and together they crossed as the sun slid toward late afternoon. The water caught the sky's reflection, turning it into shifting sheets of silver and blue. For a moment, Alaric imagined the river itself ground into pigment, bottled, and used to illuminate pages. By dusk, he reached another monastery, smaller than his own, yet alive with its own rhythm. Bells called the brothers to prayer, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifted across the courtyard. Alaric was received warmly, as was the custom among monastic houses, guest beds always made ready, simple meals always offered. In the scriptorium of this abbey, he saw familiar faces bent over parchment, though here the lamps burned with rushlights instead of beeswax candles. Shadows leapt restlessly against the stone walls, giving the impression that the saints painted on the margins were stirring, shifting, almost alive. That evening, after prayers, one of the local monks spoke to Alaric of their own colors. "We trade with dyers in the town," he explained, showing jars of verdigris green, lead white, and the brown of walnut husks. "But as for ultramarine, we have none. Too costly. We use azurite instead, cheaper, though it dulls with age." He opened a book, and Alaric saw the faint traces of blue faded into gray. Saints' robes that once glimmered like heaven had dulled into something earthbound, ordinary. "The people still revere it," the monk said with a soft shrug. "But we remember how it might have shone." Alaric sat with a thought long after the lamps were dimmed, lying awake beneath the wooden beams of the guest house roof. He remembered the merchant's jar, the deep blue powder that seemed to swallow light and give it back as radiance. He thought of the abbey's own manuscripts, and of the faces of villagers who sometimes glimpsed them eyes wide, lips parted in awe at saints clothed in heaven's own color. Was that not worth the long journeys, the peril of trade routes, the careful grinding of stone into dust? As the night deepened, he listened to the hush of the river outside and the occasional cry of an owl. He thought of the laborers in far-off lands, hammering into rock beneath mountains older than kingdoms. He thought of the caravans that wound through deserts, of sailors hauling cargo across storm-thrown seas, of scribes hunched in candlelight, mixing powder with egg yolk, steadying their breath before letting the first brushstroke fall. By the time sleep came, the visions of blue filled his dreams robes that shimmered brighter than daylight, skies that could be trapped on parchment, and words that seemed to float upon color like stars upon the night. Morning arrived with birdsong, and Alaric continued south. His path grew steeper, winding into hills where the air turned thin and sharp. He passed shepherds guiding their flocks, bells clinking softly on the sheep's necks. Here and there, wildflowers dotted the slopes yellow, red, and faintly purple. Yet even in their beauty, Alaric found himself searching for blue. Not the pale hue of sky, nor the fleeting shade of a flower, but that deep, unfathomable blue he had glimpsed in the merchant's jar. At the crest of the hill, he paused, staff in hand, and looked out. The horizon stretched wide, fields and villages laid out like a tapestry, and above it all, the sky poured down its endless blue, free and abundant, unreachable yet ever-present. He whispered a prayer then, not just for safe passage, but for the chance that one day his own brush might dip into that ultramarine, and that he might give to the world a fragment of heaven, captured in pigment, preserved on parchment for generations yet unborn. And with that quiet hope, he descended the path, the journey not yet ended. The road narrowed as Brother Alaric drew nearer to his destination. The abbey where he would deliver his satchel lay beyond a valley, nestled between rolling meadows and thick woods. As he descended, the air filled with the sound of water trickling over stones, and the faint scent of wild thyme crushed beneath his sandals. He felt the weight of his burden-vellum sheets, carefully prepared, blank yet full of promise. The abbey's gate came into view by late afternoon, its weathered wood braced with iron. Bells tolled softly, calling the brothers to vespers, and Alaric stepped forward, offering his name and purpose. Soon he was ushered into the quiet heart of the cloister, where shaded arcades wrapped around a courtyard filled with herbs, bees, and a simple fountain. The abbot received him with gentle courtesy. He was a man of silver hair and steady gaze, clothed in a robe patched at the elbows yet clean. As Alaric bowed and offered the satchel, the abbot unfastened it with care, fingers brushing over the vellum. "Fine work," he murmured. "Smooth as ivory, ready for the word. You have done well." Alaric bowed again, though his mind drifted back to the market, to the little jar of blue powder glimmering in the sun. That evening, after the office of prayer, The abbot invited Alaric into the scriptorium. Candles burned low, casting a honeyed glow on rows of desks. Some monks copied texts, others sharpened quills or ground pigments. At one bench sat a brother with mortar and pestle, crushing malachite into green dust. Another stirred a mixture of oak galls and iron salts, creating ink black as midnight. On the abbot's table lay a freshly begun manuscript, a gospel book intended for a noble patron. Margins already held flourishes of red and gold, while empty spaces waited for the blues that would crown the Virgin's robe and the heavens above Christ. The abbot glanced at Alaric. "You have journeyed far. Tell me, did you see anything of value on the road?" Alaric hesitated, then spoke of the merchant and his little jars, of ochres and greens, and of one sealed jar filled with ultramarine. He described the glow of the powder, the way it seemed to drink in the sun. The abbot listened in silence, his expression unreadable. At last he said, "We know of such pigment. Rare, costly. Some say a single ounce can rival a man's yearly wage. Yet for this commission, our patron has sent funds enough. Tomorrow, we shall visit the merchant. We will see if he yet holds that jar." The following day, Alaric accompanied the abbot into the town. The market was alive again with clamor and color, and soon enough they found the merchant beneath his patchwork awning. He greeted them with a bow, eyes narrowing with recognition at Alaric. From beneath his table, he drew the wax-sealed jar, setting it upon the cloth like a relic. The abbot studied it a long while. Then, with the calm of one used to weighty decisions, he offered a pouch of coins. Gold gleamed as it was counted, and the merchant, with reverence, slid the jar forward. Alaric felt a shiver pass through him as the abbot lifted it. Within, the powder glowed with an inner light, like fragments of the firmament ground fine. "Handle it carefully," the merchant said softly. "It is heaven, trapped in dust." Back at the abbey, the preparation began. The jar was opened, and the pigment was mixed with egg yolk, ground again with a drop of oil, stirred until smooth. Alaric watched as a brush was dipped, its tip dark and wet, ready to lay color upon vellum. The illuminator began with slow, steady strokes. The Virgin's robe bloomed into ultramarine, each fold deep as twilight, each curve alive with radiance. Around her, the stars were pricked with gold, yet it was the blue that held the gaze, that impossible. Endless blue, rarer than any jewel, brighter than any treasure. The monks gathered quietly, each one pausing in awe. Even the abbot, normally reserved, allowed a small smile to crease his lips. "This," he murmured, "is worth every coin. For what is gold but earth, and what is lapis but the sky?" Alaric felt his heart stir. He thought of the long journey of the stone from distant mountains, across deserts, over seas, into this small jar, now brushed onto vellum where it would remain for centuries. He thought of how one day villagers, nobles, even kings might gaze upon this very page and feel their spirits lifted toward heaven. And in that moment, he understood why blue paint had been worth more than gold. Gold glittered, but blue invited the soul to wander, to dream, to believe. The weeks passed in quiet labor. Alaric assisted in the scriptorium, sharpening quills, preparing inks, and turning pages for the illuminator. Each day, the manuscript grew more radiant, each letter dressed in beauty, each image alive with color. And always, it was the blue that drew the eye, the blue of saints' robes, of skies above castles, of rivers that wound like ribbons of light. One evening, as candles guttered low, and the last stroke of the brush was laid, the abbot gathered the brothers. They turned the pages together, their voices hushed in wonder. What lay before them was no longer mere parchment, it was a window into heaven, a treasury of faith and art, a gift beyond measure. Alaric stood at the edge of the circle, his hands folded, his eyes bright. He thought again of the merchant's words, "It is heaven, trapped in dust," and he knew them to be true. When his time came to return north, The abbot blessed him and placed in his hands a single sheet of vellum, painted with a small but perfect illumination. It showed a simple star set against a field of ultramarine. "Carry this," the abbot said. "Not as treasure, but as reminder. Beauty endures even when gold is spent." Alaric bowed deeply, his heart filled with quiet gratitude. He left the abbey at dawn, the little page wrapped carefully within his satchel. As he walked into the misty fields, birds lifting from hedgerows, and the sky opening pale above him, he felt the presence of that blue within him, vast, serene, eternal. And so his journey continued. But wherever he traveled, through villages and towns, across rivers and hills, he carried with him the knowledge of a truth few ever touched, that once, in the age of monks and manuscripts, blue paint was worth more than gold. Our story begins at the edge of a forested valley, where smoke curls gently from the roofs of a cluster of workshops, and where the clang of tools carries faintly on the morning air. The place is known by locals simply as the Glass Grove, though no grove grows here. Instead, the men who work its furnaces claim it is named for the way sunlight strikes the shards scattered near their doors, lighting the ground with a brilliance like frozen dew. It is the year of our Lord, 1374, and in this valley, a young apprentice named Matthew bends over a wooden bench. His hands are stained with ash, his tunic roughened by sparks. In front of him rests a rod of iron, at its end a shimmering bubble of molten glass, glowing as though a star had been caught and made to hover at the tip of his tool. He blows gently, cheeks puffed, eyes steady. The glowing sphere swells, shifting, alive with each breath. This is the hidden breath, the secret force behind medieval glassmaking. Few in the outside world truly understand it. They see only the goblets in noble halls, the colored windows in chapels, the mirrors rumored to hold strange powers. But here, among furnaces and sand, it is known that every piece of glass begins in silence, heat, and a single human breath. The workshop is warm, filled with the crackle of the furnace. Its walls are darkened by smoke, the beams above crusted with soot. Beside Matthew stands his master, a man called Eudes, whose beard is gray and whose voice is always quiet, as though he fears to disturb the flame. His eyes rest not on the glow of the molten glass, but on the boy's posture, his hands, the steadiness of his breath. "Not too fast," Eudes murmurs. "Let the fire shape it as much as you. You must breathe as though whispering to a child." Matthew steadies himself, blowing slower now, the bubbles stretching into a pear-shaped form. Sweat drips from his brow, but he dares not flinch. Eudes nods. "Good. Remember this. Glass is born of earth, fire, and air. But it is the air within you, lad, that makes it whole. Few in the village dare enter this place. The workmen are half feared, half revered. Glassmakers in medieval France are thought of as alchemists, men who meddle with the four elements, coaxing earth into transparency, teaching fire to obey, and giving breath to stone. Some whisper that they consort with spirits, that their glass is enchanted. Others believe the furnaces hide secrets meant only for guild masters and kings. Matthew, who has lived among them since boyhood, knows the truth is both simpler and stranger. Glass is made of sand, yes, but not just any sand. The best is brought from far-off shores, sifted fine, free of impurities. To this is added ashes soda ash from burned plants, or potash from wood. These help the sand melt more easily, fusing at the furious heat of the furnace. Without them, the sand would stubbornly remain as sand. Into the mixture sometimes goes crushed limestone to make the glass strong, less quick to shatter. And sometimes into secret recipes, masters stir bits of metal or minerals to create color. Copper for green, cobalt for blue, gold for a deep ruby red. These secrets are guarded fiercely, for colored glass fetches prices fit for princes. That day, Matthew's task is not goblets or jewels of color, but a simple beaker. He shapes the bubble carefully, rolling it on a smooth stone slab called the marver, letting it cool and harden slightly, then blowing again. At last, his master takes the rod, adds a final breath, and with a sharp twist breaks the glowing vessel free. It is placed in a smaller oven to cool slowly. Too fast a cooling, and the glass would shatter in an instant. As it rests, Matthew allows himself a smile. It is not his first vessel, but it is the first that has not collapsed under its own weight or burst with a sound like cracking ice. Better, says Eudes. You are learning. In time, you will learn also the patience for windows, for mirrors, perhaps even for the cathedral. His eyes gleam as he says it, for to work on stained glass is to touch eternity itself. That evening, when the furnaces die down and the apprentices sweep the ash from the floor, Matthew slips outside. The valley is quiet, the air cool, carrying the scent of pine and the faint trickle of the brook. He holds a small shard of waste glass in his hand, its surface faintly green from the impurities of the ash. He lifts it to the fading light, and the world beyond it swims into strange clarity. He thinks of the whispers in the village, that glassmakers trap spirits, that each window holds a ghost of the man who breathed it. Once in jest, another apprentice had told him that when a glassblower dies, his final breath is caught forever in the last vessel he made, rattling inside like a trapped bee. Matthew had laughed, but tonight, holding the shard, he wonders. For within the shard is his own breath, frozen in a bubble, a ripple caught in stone. And if that is not a kind of enchantment, what is? Days pass, then weeks. Matthew's skill grows. He learns how to add a gather of molten glass onto another, to form handles, to shape spouts. He learns how to crack a piece free with a touch of wet wood, how to spin a vessel quickly to flare its rim wide. He learns also the silence of the furnace, how its roar fills the workshop, and yet how each man hears something different in it. Sometimes at night, when the flames glow low, Matthew watches his master grind fragments of colored glass into fine powders. These will be painted onto windows, forming saints and angels that, when fired again, will fix their colors forever. It seems to Matthew like painting with gemstones, with powdered jewels. Once he dares to ask, "Master, why is glass so feared by some?" Eudes pauses, considering. Because it is both fragile and eternal. Strike it wrong, it shatters. Yet, if left untouched, it will outlast iron, wood, flesh, bone. A window made today may shine 1,000 years hence. Men fear what outlives them, lad. They always have. Matthew shivers, though the furnace is hot. Not far from the workshop, high on a hill, a new chapel is being built. Its walls rise slowly, stone upon stone, as masons sweat and labor. Matthew often carries buckets of shards there for the glaziers to sort and fit into their windows. He loves to see their work, panels of saints in robes of sapphire, angels in crimson wings, kings in robes of green. One day, he pauses before a nearly finished window, sunlight blazing through it. The Virgin gazes down, her robe a deep blue unlike any Matthew has ever seen. Not cobalt, not copper, but something richer. He asks the glazier what makes it, so the man lowers his voice. Lapis lazuli, he whispers, ground fine, mixed into the glass itself, brought from mountains far east, beyond lands you'll never see. More costly than gold, yet for the Mother of God, only the purest sky will do. Matthew stares, awed. He remembers the dull green of his shard, the brown of common bottles, the faint colors of copper. And now he sees what glass can become when touched with the rarest of earth's gifts. For the first time, he feels the true hunger of the craft, not just to make vessels, not just to earn bread, but to shape something that can capture heaven's own light. That night, sleep will not come. He lies in the apprentice's loft, staring at the beams, listening to the crackle of embers below. He thinks of the phrase whispered often among the glassmakers, the hidden breath. Not just air from the lungs, but the unseen spirit, the mystery that enters sand and emerges as clarity. He wonders if one day his own breath, his own spirit, will live on in a window, in a chalice, in some fragment that glimmers long after his bones are dust. And as the night deepens, he drifts at last into slumber, his dreams filled with light, color, and the roar of the eternal flame. The town's bell tolled low across the valley as Brother Elric rose before dawn, his sandals pressing against cold stone floors that remembered every footstep of generations past. The monastery stirred slowly, monks whispering chants in the chapel, their voices weaving through corridors like threads of incense. But Elric's path diverged from prayer that morning. He slipped through a side gate, carrying a small satchel of tools, bound for the glassmaker's workshop that perched like a secret at the edge of the woods. Within, the furnace glowed faintly from last night's embers, a heartbeat waiting to be rekindled. Thomas, the master glassmaker, already worked there, his broad shoulders bent over the coals. Sparks leapt as he fed the fire, coaxing it back into life with a patience that mirrored devotion. The air shimmered with a tang of ash and sand. "Your early brother," Thomas muttered without looking up. "Curiosity wakes me faster than prayer," Elric replied with a half-smile. Thomas finally met his gaze, gray eyes lined with years of firelight. "Then today, your curiosity will earn its lesson. Watch closely, for this is not just craft. It is the hidden breath of the world." He reached for a small pouch, its drawstring stained blue from years of contact with crushed minerals. From it he poured a cascade of powder, fragments of quartz faintly sparkling. Each grain looked ordinary, yet when touched by flame, it promised transformation. Elric leaned closer, drawn into the mystery of it. Thomas continued, "The earth offers sand. Fire gives heat, but glass is born from something unseen. It is the union of breath and flame. Remember this." He lifted the blowpipe, a simple iron tube polished smooth by use, and dipped its end into the crucible of molten glass. Elric's eyes widened. The substance clung like honey, glowing orange, quivering as though alive. Thomas pressed his lips to the pipe and exhaled slowly, steadily. The molten lump swelled outward, a trembling sphere taking shape, expanding gently like the lungs of a sleeping child. Elric's breath caught. "It's as though you breathe life itself into it." "That is the secret monks forget when they gild letters or grind pigments," Thomas said. "Every art, every craft relies on the same mystery, the unseen gift of breath." The sphere cooled slightly, hardening into form. Thomas rotated it, the glowing glass reflecting like a captured sunrise. He tapped the end of the pipe against the bench, and the sphere detached with a sharp crack, falling into a bed of ash where it settled to cool. "Why hide such a wonder?" Elric whispered. Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. "Because the world prizes what it can measure in coin, silver, gold, jewels. But glass is overlooked until its clarity reveals something greater. Kings see their faces in polished mirrors, bishops peer at sacred words through lenses. Yet they forget that every piece began with nothing more than a man's breath." Elric scribbled notes hastily into a small parchment journal, his quill scratching as though trying to capture not just the process, but the spirit of it. He wondered whether the Abbey's library could ever contain such secrets, or whether they would slip between the lines, too alive to be pinned by ink. By midday, the workshop hummed with rhythm. The furnace roared, the bellows groaned, and glass cooled in neat rows along the benches. The apprentices scurried, bringing wood for the fire and grinding minerals for color. Cobalt for blue, manganese for purple, iron for green. Thomas beckoned Elric closer to the pigments. "Do you see these?" He held up a fragment of cobalt glass, deep as twilight. "This, the king's covet. But I tell you, it is the same breath that shapes it. Without the blower's lungs, the color is only dust." Elric nodded, entranced. "Then the value is not in the mineral alone, but in the union of man and flame." "Exactly." Thomas's eyes gleamed with pride. "Glass remembers the breath, Every vessel, every window, every chalice, all hold the ghost of the man who shaped them. The thought unsettled Elric, yet fascinated him. To drink from a goblet was to sip alongside the breath of another. To gaze through a window was to see the world tinted by the lungs of a craftsman long gone. That night, when the bells called the monks to prayer, Elric lingered behind in the scriptorium. The candlelight flickered across his parchment, and he dipped his quill into ink, hesitating before writing. His Latin words formed carefully, spiritus in vitro latet. The spirit hides in glass. The phrase echoed in his mind long after he closed the book. He wondered if someday, centuries hence, another hand might trace his words, trying to imagine what he had seen, what he had felt, standing in the glow of the furnace. And so his visits continued. Each dawn, after prayers, Elric walked the forest path to Thomas's workshop. He learned to grind quartz into fine sand, to weigh ash with careful balance, to mix colors from minerals pulled from deep earth. He learned the delicate timing, when to blow, when to turn, when to let heat rest its hand. He burned his fingers more than once, but the sting became a teacher. Above all, he learned to respect the silence between breaths. For in that pause, glass either held its form or collapsed back into formless fire. One evening, when autumn winds pressed against the shutters, Thomas grew uncharacteristically solemn. He beckoned Elric closer to the hearth, where a half-finished vessel shimmered faintly. "Brother," he said, "there is something you must understand. Glass is not only art or utility. It is memory. It holds what the world forgets." Elric frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" Thomas pointed to the vessel. "This piece was blown by an apprentice who no longer walks this earth. His lungs shaped it. His breath lingers still inside the hollow. When I look at it, I remember him. When another drinks from it, though they know it not, they share in his last exhale." The thought shivered through Elric. Then every window in a cathedral, every chalice on an altar, "Yes," Thomas said softly. "Each one carries the hidden breath of its maker. And so, though men's bodies crumble into dust, their breath, unseen, unnoticed, lives on in glass." The idea filled Elric with a reverence deeper than any sermon. He thought of the great rose windows of cathedrals, sunlight pouring through them in fractured rainbows. He imagined not just colors and light, but the countless breaths trapped within, mingling across centuries, each pane a vessel of memory. He wrote that night with fevered intensity, "Vita per spiritum mene in vitro. Life endures through breath and glass." And he wondered, was this knowledge too fragile for ink? Would it break like thin crystal in careless hands? Or was it meant to be hidden, as breath is hidden, until someone paused to look closer, to listen deeper? The months passed. Winter laid its silver veil across the valley, snow thick upon rooftops, smoke rising from chimneys like soft banners. The monastery grew colder, prayers heavier with breath turned to mist. Yet the glassmaker's furnace burned hotter than ever, its fire defiant against frost. One morning, Thomas placed a hand on Elric's shoulder. "You are ready," he said. "Take the pipe." Elric hesitated, heart pounding. He stepped toward the crucible, dipped the iron tube into molten glass, and lifted the glowing lump. Its weight dragged at the pipe, but he steadied himself. Raising it to his lips, he exhaled, gently, cautiously. The molten form quivered, expanding. His breath wove itself into the glass, and for the first time, Elric felt the miracle not with his eyes, but with his chest. The warmth of the furnace met the warmth of his lungs, and between them, shape was born. When he finished, a small orb lay cooling in ash, imperfect, lopsided, yet unmistakably his. He laughed softly, the sound echoing in the workshop. Thomas smiled. "Now you understand. You're a part of the chain. Your breath will live beyond you, hidden where no eye sees, yet carried forward." Elric touched the orb with reverence. It felt fragile, yes, but also eternal. He He whispered, almost as a prayer, "Then glass is not just craft, it is soul made visible." And so the hidden wrath lingered in the furnace, in the vessels, in the windows of chapels across the land. Each piece, fragile yet enduring, carried the memory of its maker. And though the world might never speak of it, the truth remained. Glass was not merely sand and fire, but spirit suspended in silence. The story of glassmaking was not written only in ledgers of trade or records of kings. It was written in air itself, the air of men long gone, sealed within crystal walls, whispering still to those who cared to listen. And Brother Alric, monk and scribe, would ensure that whisper was not lost. Spring came slowly to the valley, melting snow into streams that wound around the workshop like silver ribbons. The air was damp, earthy, smelling of moss and wet stone, carrying the faint tang of the forest beyond. Elric walked the path to Thomas's workshop each morning, feeling the pulse of life returning to the land. The furnace, now stoked daily, roared like a heartbeat, and the glowing orbs of molten glass called to him with the promise of creation. One morning, a carriage rolled slowly up the hill, its wheels crunching against the gravel. Out stepped a man draped in dark velvet, a seal of gold pinned to his chest. Thomas's brow furrowed. This was no ordinary visitor. Guild matters, it seemed, had come to the valley. "Master Thomas," the man said, bowing slightly, "the Guild of Glassmakers requests your presence." "A commission of the highest order, windows for the new cathedral in the capital." The word struck Elric like a bell. The cathedral. He had heard tales of its vast stone walls, the height of its spires, the light that would pour through colored glass into its nave. To be part of such work, it was an honor few ever dreamed of. Thomas nodded gravely. "Then we must prepare. You, Elric, will come with me. You will carry the hidden breath into the world beyond this valley." Traveling was slow. The road, worn by merchants and pilgrims, wound through forests, crossed rivers, and climbed hills where wind bit through cloaks. Elric carried carefully packed tools, small vials of powdered minerals, and a selection of fragile vessels that held the first attempts of his craft. Thomas kept a watchful eye, instructing him on every step, on how to safeguard both tools and secrets. They arrived at the city as dusk fell. The streets were alive with chatter, the scent of bread, ale, and smoke swirling through narrow alleys. Gas lamps had not yet come, but lanterns hung at doorways, casting golden pools on cobblestone. Thomas led Elric to the workshop near the cathedral site, where guildmasters awaited. The hall was enormous, filled with furnaces and benches, each humming with the energy of creation. Apprentices and masters alike paused to inspect the new arrivals. Elric felt the weight of their eyes, and yet also the warmth of welcome. Here, his hidden breath would mingle with countless others, each glassblower contributing to the vast tapestry of cathedral light. The work began in earnest. Thomas and Elric were assigned a series of panels: saints, angels, kings, and scenes from scripture. Each panel required precise color, precise shaping, precise timing. They ground minerals into powders: cobalt for the deep blues of the Virgin's robe, copper for green leaves, gold for the halos that would crown angels. They mixed sand and ashes, kneaded molten glass on the marver, and blew it into hollow forms, each breath delicate, each movement crucial. Elric quickly realized that the cathedral windows were a different kind of work. Unlike small goblets or jars, these panels demanded endurance. The glass would be stretched, cut, and fitted into lead frames, then hoisted hundreds of feet above ground. A single flaw could shatter months of labor. The stakes made his chest tighten, but he remembered Thomas's words. The hidden breath must remain steady. Only then does glass hold its memory. One afternoon, while preparing a batch of ultramarine glass, Elric paused, staring at the glowing blue. He recalled the lessons from the valley, how rare pigments were, how a single ounce of lapis lazuli could cost more than gold. And yet here, in the heart of the city, in a cathedral meant to touch the heavens, the same principles applied. The value of glass was not in coin alone. It was in devotion and breath and patience. He dipped the blowpipe, exhaled gently, and watched the molten glass expand, swallow the air, and solidify into form. The hidden breath, once contained in a small workshop, now mingled with the work of dozens of other artisans. Each pane, each shard, became a repository of human effort, hope, and spirit. Thomas observed quietly. "See how the city changes the work?" He murmured. "The hidden breath must stretch further now, reach higher. The walls are taller, the light stronger. Every pane carries not just shape, but the weight of the faithful." Evenings were spent on the scaffolding where Elric observed the city from above. The roofs of homes sloped like gentle waves. Smoke spiraled from chimneys. Bells tolled in the distance, marking hours with solemnity. From here, he could imagine how the sunlight would later pass through their panels, scattering color across stone floors, painting patterns on pews, illuminating faces of the faithful in hues of blue, green, and gold. "Each color tells a story," Thomas said one evening. "Blue is not only the Virgin's robe, it is the sky, the heavens themselves. Green is not merely leaf, but life. Red is sacrifice, gold is divinity. And every piece, every single bubble, every hidden breath, carries meaning beyond measure." Elric nodded, entranced. He thought of the valley, of the small furnace, of his first attempts that now seemed distant. Yet all were connected. Every breath, every flame, every pulse of the workshop formed a chain that led to this cathedral, to these windows that would stand for centuries. The guild imposed strict secrecy. Apprentices were forbidden from revealing techniques to outsiders. Minerals were counted meticulously. Batches of glass tracked by date, origin, and artisan. Even within the workshop, whispers were careful, stories guarded. Elric realized this secrecy was not mere pride. It was survival. Guilds protected knowledge fiercely because rivals, eager for profit, would steal recipes, buy spies, or worse, sabotage fragile work. Yet Thomas taught Elric to respect secrecy not only as protection but as reverence. The hidden breath is precious. It is yours, yet it belongs to all who see its gift. To misuse it is to betray centuries of devotion. Elric accepted this, internalizing the responsibility of creation. He saw the faces of saints taking shape in colored glass, realized that each line, each curve, each hue depended not only on skill but on care, on attention to the unseen forces that shaped the material. Weeks turned to months. Panels were hoisted into place, one by one, in the stone tracery of the cathedral. Elric climbed ladders, balancing precariously, guiding each pane into its frame. Wind tugged at the scaffolding, yet he held steady, feeling the invisible conversation between hand and air, between breath and flame, guiding glass into place. When the first morning sun passed through a completed window, the effect was breathtaking. Rays of cobalt blue, ruby red, and emerald green spilled across stone floors, catching dust motes in the air, transforming them into tiny stars. Elric paused, entranced, feeling the hidden breath, his own and all others, fill the space with life. He realized then the full truth Thomas had hinted at from the valley. Glass was not static. It moved with light, carried stories in color, held memory within each pane. To make it was to participate in a living history, invisible yet eternal. One night, after the city slept, Elric lingered in the workshop alone. He held a small shard of cobalt glass, tracing the curves with his finger. The memory of countless breaths seemed to pulse within it, an echo of every artisan who had shaped, lifted, and guided this fragile substance. He whispered to the shard, almost instinctively, "You carry life, you carry memory, you carry us all." The shard shimmered faintly in candlelight, and Elric felt a quiet connection to centuries of artisans, those who had kneaded sand, stoked furnaces, and breathed life into molten stone. He thought of the hidden breath as more than mere air. It was devotion, patience, skill, hope, memory, an invisible thread tying past to present, valley to cathedral, mortal hand to eternal light. The cathedral neared completion. Elric and Thomas worked tirelessly, guiding every panel, adjusting colors, ensuring that every pane would catch sunlight in the intended pattern. Visitors, mostly clergy and nobles, marveled at the windows, but few understood the labor, patience, or the hidden breaths contained within. Thomas said, "They see beauty. That is enough. They need not know the secrets. But one day, perhaps someone like you will pause and remember." Elric nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of the statement. Every flicker of sunlight on glass was a heartbeat of history, a testament to labor and devotion that could outlast generations. And so, as the final panels were hoisted into place, Elric took a step back, surveying the cathedral in full light. He felt the pulse of the hidden breath in every pane, in every reflection, in every shadow. It was everywhere, in the windows, in the air, in his own chest. He realized that glassmaking was not merely a craft, a trade, or even an art. It was a dialogue between human and element, between mortal and eternal. And he had learned, at last, that the secret of the hidden breath was not something to be taught or hoarded. It was something to be shared, quietly, with the world, one pane at a time. The city had awakened to a golden morning, sunlight spilling across cobblestones, gilding rooftops with warmth. The cathedral's towers caught the early light, casting long shadows across the streets. Elric stood at the base, gazing upward, feeling the hidden breath ripple through the glass like a gentle pulse. He traced the windows with his eyes, angels in cobalt robes, saints with ruby halos, kings draped in emerald and gold. Each pane carried a memory, each color a story shaped by countless breaths across decades. Thomas came to his side, leaning on a carved staff. "It is done," he said softly. "All the pieces are in place. The breath is yours now, Elric, and yet it belongs to everyone who walks beneath these walls." Elric nodded, feeling a weight he could not name. He remembered the valley, the first molten bubbles, the fires, the sand sifted through hands, and the many long days he had spent learning the delicate rhythm between air and flame. Each memory shimmered like light through colored glass. The master gestured toward the largest window, a grand rose that crowned the eastern wall. "This is not merely the Virgin, it is the world itself. Look carefully. Each section represents a season, a passage of life, a chapter of history. And each piece, every breath of ours, is hidden within." Elric stepped closer, shading his eyes against the sun. He studied the glass, noting the tiny imperfections, a bubble here, a ripple there, and realized they were not flaws, but fingerprints of life itself. They were proof that a mortal hand, breathing, shaping, guiding, had touched eternity. Visitors began to gather as the bells rang for morning mass. Nobles, clergy, townsfolk, all looked upward in awe, unaware of the labor and secret breaths captured in each pane. Elric noticed a young child staring wide-eyed at the sunlight scattering across the stone floor. For a moment, the boy's hand reached out toward the patterns, as if he could touch the hidden breath. Elric felt something stir inside him. The craft was more than technique. It was transmission, connection, life made visible. Every pane, from the smallest fragment to the massive rose, carried the breath of those who had worked, hoped, and dreamed before him, and now him as well. He understood Thomas's words fully. The hidden breath was not merely air. It was devotion, memory, patience, and love made tangible in molten sand. As the day stretched on, Thomas called Elric to the workshop one final time. He led him to a small table at the back, where several vials of powdered minerals rested. "These are for you," Thomas said, handing them over. "Your journey continues. You will carry these beyond this city, to other workshops, to other windows, to other cathedrals. And wherever you go, remember, it is not the material that is precious, but the breath within." Elric held the vials gently, feeling the weight of responsibility. Each crystal fragment could become blue skies, green forests, red robes, or golden halos, but only if guided by steady hands and careful breath. Thomas's voice grew softer, almost a whisper. "Teach what you must, but guard the secret. Respect the hidden breath. It is older than any guild, older than the city, older than ourselves." Elric nodded, absorbing every word. He felt ready, not only as a glassblower, but as a steward of something timeless, a carrier of whispers trapped in molten stone, ready to shape the light of future generations. Weeks passed, and the cathedral became a living monument. Sunlight poured through the windows, filling the nave with color, warmth, and light. Priests moved beneath the stained glass, their chants resonating with the hidden breath suspended above. Townsfolk paused to marvel, children ran through pools of colored light, and travelers carried tales of the extraordinary cathedral back to distant lands. Elric continued his work, now entrusted with his own set of panels. He experimented with shapes, pushed the limits of color, and learned the delicate art of tempering glass for strength. Every morning, he returned to the furnace. Every evening, he recorded his observations, refining techniques while honoring centuries of tradition. And yet, despite the grandeur of the cathedral, his mind often wandered back to the small valley, to the first glowing bubble he had shaped to the sound of wind in the forest, and the warmth of the first furnace he attended. Those early days had taught him more than technique. They had taught him reverence for breath itself. One quiet evening, after the cathedral had been completed, Elric wandered among the workshops empty of apprentices, the flames of the furnaces dying low. He picked up a shard of cobalt glass from the table and held it to the moonlight streaming through a nearby window. He imagined the hands that had touched it, the lungs that had shaped it, the tiny pulse of air that had expanded and cooled to solidify forever. He traced the curves with his fingers, and in the silence, he felt the hidden breath as clearly as if it were his own heartbeat. Thomas approached quietly, not speaking. He stood beside Elric, sharing the view. Together, they gazed at the shard, at the city, at the cathedral that now held centuries of labor, light, and breath. "Do you see?" Thomas asked finally. "The world will change, kingdoms will rise and fall, yet this will remain. Our breaths, small and unnoticed, captured in fire and sand, will endure far beyond us." Elric nodded, understanding completely. Glassmaking was not merely a craft. It was immortality in miniature, a record of devotion, skill, and soul. Years passed. Elric became a master, taking on apprentices of his own. He taught them how to measure sand, how to mix ashes, how to coax the molten sphere into form, but most importantly, he taught them the philosophy Thomas had imparted, the hidden breath. He reminded them that glass carried memory, that it held the labor and devotion of those who had touched it. Every panel, goblet, mirror, and vessel became a vessel not just of color, but of spirit. And so, through generations, the hidden breath endured. In valley workshops, in city cathedrals, in homes and castles, glass carried with it the whispers of the past. Craftsmen who came centuries later would still pause, tracing their fingers along smooth surfaces, sensing the pulse of breath, the quiet heartbeat of artisans long gone. Elric, now old, would sit by his furnace, observing apprentices blow molten glass. He would smile, remembering his first attempts, the valley, the forests, and the first touch of Thomas's hand on his shoulder. The secret was still alive, carried forward by those who honored it. One day, as he lifted a freshly shaped orb from the furnace, he whispered softly to it, "Carry our breath, carry our memory, carry life beyond us." And the glass shimmered, warm with captured light, carrying the invisible rhythm of human spirit through centuries yet to come. Even today, if one walks beneath a medieval cathedral, if one traces sunlight through stained glass, one might feel it, a pulse, a quiet rhythm, a breath trapped in crystal. It is the hidden breath of generations, invisible yet eternal, whispering stories of fire, sand, and human hands. And so the legacy endures, silent but unwavering, a testament to devotion, patience, and the invisible breath that gives life to the fragile and eternal beauty of glass. And our next story is The Midnight Secrets of a Castle Kitchen. Let's begin. The castle lay in shadow, its tall stone walls rising like silent guardians over the valley below. Torches flickered along the battlements, sending dancing patterns across the cold stone, yet within, the halls were quiet. Lords and ladies slept in their chambers, the soft rustle of curtains and the occasional clink of a distant lantern marking the gentle rhythm of night. But below, in the heart of the castle, life stirred differently. The kitchen glowed warmly, the hearth roaring and sparks rising like tiny fireflies toward the arched ceiling. Pans clanged softly as cooks moved in practiced rhythm, a quiet symphony of preparation. Here, in the midst of stone and shadow, bread was rising, broth simmering, and the scents of spices, cinnamon, saffron, and cloves filled the air in whispers more delicate than the wind outside. At the center of this nocturnal ballet moved Master Cedric, the head cook, his hair silver in the torchlight. His hands were steady, kneading dough with a rhythm born of decades of practice. "Patience," he murmured, as if speaking to the bread itself. "Let the yeast awaken fully. Let it dream." Apprentices shuffled around him, carrying bowls of flour and herbs, their bare feet muffled by the worn stone floors. Among them was young Leora, eyes wide and curious, always eager to observe the secrets of the night. She tilted her head, watching Cedric sprinkle saffron into a simmering broth. Each strand glowed like a golden thread, and the aroma rose like a soft song, wrapping around her senses. "Why do we cook at night, Master?" she asked in a whisper, careful not to disturb the quiet magic of the kitchen. Cedric smiled, eyes crinkling. "Because the castle sleeps and the kitchen has its own life. Bread rises best when the world is still, and the spices, they speak louder in silence." The apprentices moved in harmony, fetching firewood, stirring soups, and shaping pastry. Candles flickered across the stone walls, reflecting in copper pots that glimmered like molten gold. Outside, the moon rose over the hills, spilling silver across the courtyard, but inside, the kitchen burned bright with warmth and life. Cedric lifted a steaming pot from the hearth, and the air thickened with cinnamon and cloves. He placed a spoon near his lips, tasting the broth. Leora leaned closer, careful to breathe in the mingling scents. "It smells magical," she breathed. "Magic?" Cedric asked softly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is the patience of many hands, the careful touch of the right ingredient, at the right time, in the right light. Magic is often just attention to detail." The apprentices nodded, following his lead. They sprinkled salt and pepper, dusted sugar over dough, and watched as the bread began to swell under their hands. Outside the small windows, the night wind whispered through trees, carrying with it the faint chill of the valley. Yet inside, warmth wrapped around them like a soft cloak. A small fire flickered in the corner where pastries cooled on wooden racks. Leora reached for one, but Cedric's hand stopped her gently. "Not yet. You must wait for the proper hour, when the crust sings under your touch." Minutes passed, long and slow, yet in the quiet, nothing felt hurried. Leora watched the kitchen with wonder. She noticed tiny details, the way Cedric tilted his head as he stirred, how the apprentices' shadows stretched and danced against the walls, the way the steam from the broth swirled into the candlelight like tiny ghosts. A distant door creaked, and a cat padded silently across the floor, its paws making no sound. Cedric chuckled. Even the castle animals know to respect the night in the kitchen. Leora followed him to the pantry, where sacks of flour and barrels of spices lined the shelves. Cedric opened a small wooden box, revealing saffron threads more precious than gold. "Do you know why this spice is so valuable?" he asked. "Because it is patient. It is delicate. It cannot be hurried. It teaches respect for time itself." She nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson. The night air outside was crisp and clear, yet here, among the hearth and spice, time felt suspended, slowed by the care of hands that worked with intention. Hours passed like whispers. Cedric moved from pot to oven, checking bread, stirring broth, tasting sauces. Leora followed, learning each small motion, each careful decision. She observed how the cinnamon was measured, how saffron threads were teased into the broth, how dough was folded with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. A sudden gust rattled the window pane, and the apprentices shivered. Cedric waved a hand, brushing away their worries. "Fear not. The castle is asleep. Only the kitchen holds wakefulness tonight." He placed a loaf of bread into the oven. The crust browned quickly, filling the room with a scent that seemed almost golden. Leora reached forward to touch it, and Cedric caught her hand, laughing softly. "Patience," he reminded her. "Even the bread has its secrets, and they must be respected." Outside, the moon climbed higher, casting pale light into the corners of the kitchen. Cedric moved to a large cauldron, stirring slowly. Steam rose, carrying scents of saffron, cinnamon, and roasted meats. Leora inhaled deeply, feeling as though each breath connected her more deeply to the heart of the castle. "Do you feel it?" Cedric asked, his voice low. "The kitchen is alive. It has memory. Every loaf baked, every pot stirred, every spice measured carefully. It all lingers in the walls, waiting for someone to notice." She nodded, captivated. The idea seemed impossible, yet undeniable. The warmth of the oven, the aroma of the spices, the glow of the firelight, it all felt conscious, aware, welcoming. Cedric smiled, satisfied. "Good. You are beginning to see the secrets of the night. Remember, little one, the castle sleeps, but the kitchen dreams." As the night deepened, the apprentices worked quietly, shaping pastries, simmering sauces, and placing freshly baked bread onto wooden racks. Cedric moved among them, guiding, teaching, offering small whispers of wisdom. Leora watched, learning not only the techniques, but the rhythm of patience, the dance of shadows and flame, the magic hidden in ordinary tasks. A soft knock echoed from a distant door. Cedric moved to answer, revealing the castle steward, carrying orders for the morning feast. He handed over lists of dishes, ingredients, and instructions, then disappeared into the night. Cedric read quickly, then returned to the hearth. "The day will be busy, but the night belongs to the secrets we keep." Leora watched as he returned to the fire, adding a final pinch of salt, a hint of spice, a careful stir. The bread glowed golden, the broth simmered with gentle heat, and the kitchen hummed with life. Outside, the castle slept, but here, warmth, light, and aroma held dominion. Time seemed to fold and stretch. Leora lost track of hours, mesmerized by the rhythm of the kitchen. Cedric's hands moved with certainty, his eyes always on the small details. The apprentices mirrored his movements, learning to anticipate the next step, to feel the pulse of dough, the subtle change of color in simmering sauces, the delicate aroma of spices releasing their essence. At last, Cedric clapped his hands softly. "It is done. The loaves are ready. The broth is perfect. The pastries cooled. The secrets of this night are preserved." Leora looked around, her eyes wide with awe. "It feels like the kitchen is alive," she whispered. Cedric nodded, satisfied, and it is. Every night, it breathes with the care of those who work within it. Remember this, young one. The magic of the castle is not in its towers, its halls, or its treasures. It is here, in the warmth of the hearth, in the rising bread, in the delicate dance of flame and spice. The castle sleeps, but the kitchen dreams. The night waned, and the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon with pale pink and gold. Cedric extinguished the last candles, leaving only the embers of the hearth glowing softly. Leora followed, feeling the lingering warmth, the memory of spices, the pulse of a kitchen alive with secrets. She knew that one day she would return to this place to knead bread, to simmer broth, to measure saffron and cinnamon. And when she did, she would remember. The castle sleeps, the Lord's dream, but the kitchen carries the heartbeat of the night. The castle had settled fully into night, and the corridors echoed only with the soft patter of distant guards' footsteps. In the kitchen, however, the firelight glimmered against polished copper pots, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. Master Cedric moved quietly among the apprentices, his hands deftly folding dough, sprinkling spice, and stirring simmering pots with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting his craft. Leora watched him closely, taking in every motion. She had begun to understand the rhythm of the kitchen, the quiet language spoken between hands and fire, flame and bread, spice and broth. Each ingredient seemed to have its own life, a character in a story that unfolded only in the silent hours of the night. Tonight, Cedric had chosen a special task, preparing a saffron-infused custard for the Lord's breakfast. Leora approached the table where the mixture rested, pale gold in the moonlight, its aroma curling upward in delicate spirals. Cedric handed her a small whisk. "Do not rush," he instructed. "Custard is a test of patience. The moment you hurry, it will betray you. Listen to it, feel it, learn its secret." The apprentices worked in harmony. Some kneaded bread, others rolled pastry, and a few carefully chopped herbs for the evening stew. Outside the arched windows, the moon cast silver patterns across the courtyard, yet inside, the warm glow of the hearth dominated the senses. The aroma of cinnamon, cloves, and roasting meats mixed with the earthy scent of flour and yeast, forming an invisible veil of comfort. Leora stirred the custard slowly, watching the saffron threads release their color. Golden tendrils twisted in the liquid, moving like sunlight trapped in a bowl. She felt a strange thrill in the simplicity of the task, a connection not only to the food, but to the countless hands that had prepared meals in this very kitchen before her. "Do you feel it?" Cedric asked, leaning close. "Every night, this kitchen holds secrets. Not only of taste, but of life itself. Every loaf baked, every broth simmered, every spice measured with care. It carries the memory of those who have come before." Leora nodded, mesmerized by the concept. It was as if the kitchen itself were alive, breathing quietly in the stone walls, whispering stories only those who stayed awake to listen could hear. A sudden sound interrupted the calm. A tray clattered to the floor, startling an apprentice. Cedric raised a hand, motioning for quiet. "Even mistakes hold lessons," he murmured. "Observe, learn, and continue. The kitchen forgives those who respect its rhythm." Leora bent to help gather the fallen utensils. The small clinking echoed softly against the stone, blending with the crackle of the hearth and the distant rustle of the night wind. She felt the pulse of the kitchen more vividly now, aware of every small sound, every subtle movement. Cedric resumed his work, stirring the custard with deliberate care. He dipped a spoon and tasted, nodding with satisfaction. "Perfect," he said quietly, "patience rewarded." Outside, the castle seemed to hold its breath. Guards paced silently, towers loomed in shadow, and the moon traced a silver path across the sky. Inside, the apprentices worked, the kitchen alive with movement, scent, and warmth. Cedric guided Leora to the oven, demonstrating the subtle cues that indicated bread was ready. The golden hue, the faint crackle, the scent that rose like a soft hymn. She reached for a loaf, feeling the warmth through her hands, and Cedric's eyes twinkled. The bread speaks, he said softly. Listen, can you hear its story? Leora closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The aroma was rich and complex. Yeast, flour, honey, a hint of cinnamon. It was as if the loaf carried a memory of its creation, a record of every careful fold, every measured pinch, every breath taken in the kitchen during its making. As the night deepened, Cedric decided to teach the apprentices an ancient technique, one used only in the quietest hours. He brought out a small cauldron filled with honey and herbs and instructed Leora to gently stir. The mixture thickened slowly, taking on a golden shimmer. This is how our ancestors preserved flavor, he explained. By night, when the world sleeps, the kitchen captures essence. The longer you respect it, the richer it becomes. Leora marveled at the transformation. The simple act of stirring seemed almost sacred, a ritual connecting her to centuries of cooks who had performed the same motions. The kitchen no longer felt like a place of work. It had become a sanctuary of secrets, alive with the energy of care, patience, and devotion. In a corner, an apprentice worked on a pot of stew, adding a pinch of saffron and a dash of pepper. The aroma mingled with the custard, the bread, and the roasted meats, forming a tapestry of scents that filled the room. Cedric moved among them, offering guidance and quiet praise, his presence steady and reassuring. You see, he whispered to Leora, the castle itself watches us. It trusts those who respect the night. The lords sleep, yes, but the heart of the castle beats here, in the kitchen, where fire meets stone and patience meets craft. She nodded, absorbing every word. The idea fascinated her, that the castle, so grand and imposing in daylight, held a secret life after dark, thriving not in gold or stone, but in the warmth of hearth and the careful hands of those who served. Hours passed unnoticed. Leora moved from task to task, learning to knead dough, measure spices, stir sauces, and read the subtle cues of cooking. Cedric remained close, guiding her gently, offering wisdom without interruption. At last, they gathered around a table, tasting the fruits of their night's labor. Bread crusted golden, custard smooth and fragrant, stew rich and warming. The apprentices murmured appreciation, but Leora's attention was elsewhere. She felt a deep connection to the kitchen, to its secrets, and to the unseen rhythm that guided every motion. Cedric smiled at her, pleased. Do you understand now? He asked softly. The kitchen is more than a place to prepare food. It is a keeper of secrets, a witness to devotion, a sanctuary for those who listen. She nodded, feeling a swell of pride and wonder. The night had revealed mysteries she could never have imagined, a hidden world of patience, craft, and quiet magic. The first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Cedric extinguished the last candles, leaving only the embers glowing softly in the hearth. The apprentices stretched and yawned, aware that the night had passed almost unnoticed. Leora lingered, savoring the lingering warmth and scents. The castle sleeps, Cedric said, but remember, the kitchen dreams. And in those dreams, it holds all who respect it, all who work with care, all who understand the hidden rhythm of night and fire. Leora left the kitchen reluctantly, stepping into the pale morning light. The castle seemed different now, quieter, grander, yet familiar. She carried the memory of the night within her, the warmth, the scent, the secrets, and most importantly, the understanding that the heart of the castle was alive in ways invisible to most eyes. And so, night after night, the kitchen continued its work. Apprentices learned, bread rose, broth simmered, and spices perfumed the air. Cedric guided with gentle authority, imparting lessons not only of technique, but of rhythm, patience, and reverence. Leora absorbed every detail, knowing that one day she would carry these secrets forward, preserving the hidden life of the castle kitchen. The castle towers may have touched the clouds, its walls may have held treasures, and its halls may have echoed with the footsteps of lords and ladies, but the true heartbeat resided in the warmth of the kitchen. Where firelight glimmered bread, rose broth simmered, and cinnamon and saffron danced through the night, whispering their timeless secrets. Night had fallen once more over the castle, yet the kitchen was already alive with warmth, light, and motion. Cedric moved among the apprentices, his hands skilled and certain, his eyes observant. Tonight, the air was heavier with spice than usual, cinnamon and saffron mingling with roasted meats, roasted nuts, and fragrant herbs that seemed to weave invisible threads through the hearthlit room. Leora arrived early, her eyes shining with anticipation. She could already feel the pulse of the kitchen, that subtle rhythm that only revealed itself to those who moved with care and attention. Cedric handed her a bowl of flour and water. "Tonight," he whispered, "we explore something the castle has never seen. We will bake with a secret no apprentice has known for generations." She tilted her head, intrigued. Cedric smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held knowledge too deep for words. "Patience," he said, "and watch carefully. The night will reveal it to you." The apprentices worked quietly, the occasional scrape of a spoon or clatter of a tray punctuating the calm hum of the kitchen. Cedric demonstrated a technique passed down through centuries, layering dough with honey and spice, folding it in a way that trapped tiny pockets of air, creating delicate layers that would rise like clouds in the heat of the oven. Leora followed his hands, attempting to mirror the rhythm. She noticed the subtle differences between one fold and another, the gentle resistance of the dough, the way the honey caught the firelight as it was brushed into each layer. Every motion seemed to hum with purpose, a language unspoken but deeply understood. "The kitchen remembers everything," Cedric said, breaking the silence. "Every touch, every breath, every moment of care. That is why our food tastes as it does. That is why it carries life beyond the night in which it was made." He moved to a corner, retrieving a small, ancient box filled with rare spices, nutmeg, cardamom, and a few saffron threads so deep in gold they seemed to glow. Cedric measured them carefully, sprinkling them into a simmering sauce. Leora watched in awe, the scent rising and curling around her senses, weaving warmth and sweetness into the cool night air. "This is the heart of our craft," he whispered. "These are the treasures that whisper of distant lands, of trade caravans, of winds that carried their fragrance across oceans. Yet they are only alive when treated with care, respect, and understanding." Leora inhaled deeply. She felt as if the air itself had become rich and golden, carrying not just scent but history, memory, and secret life. The kitchen was no longer just a place to prepare food. It had become a repository of time, a living chronicle of human devotion and attention. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Bread rose, golden and warm. Custard thickened into smooth perfection. Stews simmered, their aroma filling every corner of the room. Apprentices moved like shadows, learning the subtle dance of the night kitchen, guided by Cedric's patient presence. A sudden crackle from the hearth drew Leora's gaze. Sparks rose in the firelight, drifting lazily to the ceiling before fading. Cedric smiled, observing her fascination. "Even the fire has secrets," he murmured. "It breathes, shifts, responds to your attention. Treat it kindly, and it will reward you." She nodded, feeling a deep connection to the flames, as though the heart of the kitchen pulsed not only with human hands, but with the energy of fire itself. Later, Cedric led the apprentices to the pantry, where barrels of flour, sacks of grains, and jars of preserved fruits waited. He demonstrated how to select ingredients with care, feeling the texture of flour, observing the color of grains, smelling the depth of dried herbs. Each choice affected not only flavor, but the secret life of the dish, the unseen pulse that made the kitchen's magic possible. Leora ran her fingers through the flour, feeling its soft weight, noticing the faint scent of wheat. She picked a few dried orange peels, inhaling their essence, imagining the lands from which they had traveled, carried by merchants across mountains, rivers, and deserts. The spices were more than flavor, they were history, memory, and magic intertwined. As midnight deepened, Cedric decided to reveal the kitchen's most cherished secret, a simple loaf of bread that held within it the memory of night. He explained that by kneading the dough with a certain rhythm, folding it carefully, and letting it rest beside the embers of the fire, one could capture not just flavor, but essence, the invisible energy of attention, patience, and care. Leora followed his guidance, pressing and folding with care, listening to the subtle changes in texture and aroma. The dough seemed to respond to her touch, swelling gently as if breathing along with her own heartbeat. Cedric nodded approvingly. "Do you see? The kitchen listens, the bread remembers. And in the morning, it will speak of the night it was born." They placed the loaves into the oven together, the warmth of the fire caressing the golden dough. Cedric moved to stir the stew and custard, tasting, adjusting, and guiding. The apprentices followed, each absorbed in the intricate web of tasks that kept the kitchen alive through the hours when the castle slept. Outside, the wind whispered through the towers, carrying the faint scent of smoke and frost, but inside, warmth and spice held dominion. Cedric's voice was quiet but clear as he offered encouragement, teaching Leora to read the subtle cues of heat, texture, and aroma that revealed the state of each dish. She realized that the night had transformed the kitchen into a living organism. Every flame, every fold of dough, every stir of custard connected, pulsing, alive with invisible threads of care. Near the hearth, the apprentices prepared pastries for the morning feast. Leora delicately brushed honey onto flaky layers, watching it melt and glisten in the firelight. Cedric leaned close. "Even the smallest gesture matters," he whispered. "A single drop of honey, a careful fold of dough, a measured pinch of spice. These are the things that carry the soul of the kitchen." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The night was long, but in its rhythm she discovered patience, precision, and devotion. Every movement, however small, contributed to the unseen heartbeat that gave life to the food and to the castle itself. Hours later, as the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon, Cedric called a quiet meeting of the apprentices. "Tonight you have learned more than recipes," he said softly. "You have learned to listen, to observe, to honor the hidden life of this place. Remember, the castle sleeps, but the kitchen never truly rests. It dreams, and in its dreams, it carries all who respect its rhythm." Leora glanced around at the glowing hearth, the racks of golden bread, the simmering pots, and the fragrant air. She felt a deep reverence for the quiet majesty of the kitchen, understanding that it was not the grandeur of the castle towers that held magic, but the meticulous care and devotion carried out in the glow of firelight and the perfume of spices. The apprentices began to tidy, moving quietly as the embers faded. Cedric guided them through final checks, ensuring that each loaf, each dish, each spice jar was properly arranged. Leora paused, taking in the scene, copper pots gleaming softly, the gentle curves of bread, the rich colors of custard and stew. Everything reflected light, warmth, and careful attention, a living testament to the secrets of the night. Outside, the castle began to stir. Servants and guards prepared for the day, unaware of the hidden life that had pulsed beneath their feet in the darkness. The lords and ladies would awaken to feasts prepared with care, unaware of the magic woven through each dish, each loaf, each drop of honey. Before leaving, Cedric handed Leora a small loaf, still warm from the oven. "Take this," he said. "It carries tonight's secrets. Remember the rhythm, the patience, the care. And one day, you will pass it on, preserving the hidden heartbeat of the castle kitchen." She accepted it reverently, feeling its warmth, sensing the history, the effort, the love imbued in every fold, every rise, every simmer. It was more than bread. It was a living record of devotion, patience, and the quiet magic of the night. Leora stepped into the pale morning light, carrying the loaf close. She looked back at the kitchen one last time, its glow fading as the day claimed the castle. But she knew that within the walls, the fire still burned, the bread still rose, the spices still whispered, and the kitchen continued its timeless rhythm, alive with secrets only those who listened closely could hear. The castle towers gleamed in the morning sun, the halls echoed with footsteps and laughter, and the world moved on. Yet the kitchen held its hidden life, a quiet testament to care, patience, and devotion, carrying the heartbeat of the night into every dawn. And in that quiet, Leora understood. The magic of the castle was not in its grandeur, its walls, or its treasures. It was here, in the warmth, the aroma, and the secrets of the midnight kitchen, where cinnamon and saffron danced in whispers, and every loaf and pot carried a story of the night.